Thank you, Brian. So I think that 10 or 15 years ago, that this topic would seem strange or alarmist. At that time, the U.S. elected its first black president with the highest voter turnout in 40 years. Yes, we could see many issues of concern at that time, such as increased political polarization, the large increase in corporate funding of political races, and an alarming increase in income inequality. But I didn't see that these and other factors would lead to the threat our democracy faces today. Today, I definitely worry. We could spend a long time making a full list, but I'll start here. The myth of the stolen election that a sizable minority of people believe. The January 6th insurrection aided and abetted by some of our elected representatives. The new laws restricting voting rights in many states, and the laws taking away a woman's reproductive rights. Consider this quote from Heather Cox Richardson, a professor of history at Boston College. Quote, "The old democratic argument for states' rights this is from before the Civil War, has reemerged in the present-day Republican Party, and it has taken on many of the same contours as it had in the 1850s. Adherents are operating in a false reality, believing that their vision of the nation is the only correct one, and that they must impose their will on the rest of us, no matter what we want." As Senator Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, tweeted on October 8th, 2020, "Democracy isn't the objective. Liberty, peace, and prosperity are. We want the human condition to flourish. Rank democracy can thwart that." And then Cox concludes, "The fear of democracy has brought us to the edge of losing our government." So let me be clear. The focus of the threat facing us is not the policy differences between the two parties. I personally support the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. But if the majority of our countries voted democratically to choose a different policies, I can accept that while still working to elect people who represent my view. What I'm talking about today is the active effort by the Republican Party to achieve their policy gains by limiting voter access, controlling the two least democratic institutions of our government, which is the US Senate and the courts, and subverting democratic election results in their states by manipulating the Electoral College, another undemocratic institution that's part of our government. Why is this happening? And what can we do about it? I've been reading many articles and books. A couple of books that I've read are How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, and The Upswing by Robert Putnam. One common theme in what I've read is this: compared to 50 years ago, social capital in the US has substantially reduced. We have transformed from a nation of we to a nation of I. We're not asking, what can we do for our country, as JFK asked us to do. Instead, we are looking out for number one. We're not asking, what are my responsibilities as a citizen? We're looking for lower taxes and voting against government spending that would improve nearly everyone's lives. Historians point out the loss of social capital, which is defined as extensive social networks with high levels of trust. So the decline of, there's three primary reasons that social scientists attribute to a strength of a country's democracy. And those three things are social capital, as I defined earlier, strong institutions, and shared stories. And so I mentioned social capital has been decreasing for years, and we're now seeing our democratic institutions in stress. How can we reverse these trends? Well, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences released a bipartisan report in June 2020 titled Our Common Purpose, Reinventing American Democracy for the 21st Century. This is a very thorough and inspiring report with many great ideas, and I'll share some of those. The report calls for reforms to both increase voter participation, but also to revive democratic institutions so that they are responsive and transparent. So the goal they point out in the report, and I quote here, is a virtuous cycle. A healthy constitutional democracy depends on a virtuous cycle in which responsive political institutions foster healthy civic culture of participation and responsibility, while a healthy civic culture, a combination of values, norms, and narratives, keeps our political institutions responsive and inclusive. So that report has many suggestions, and I'll share some of them here. Enlarging the House of Representatives and the use of ranked choice voting, and implementing multi-member districts, representative districts, to increase the range of voices and views at the national level. Implement independent, citizen-led redistricting commissions. Pass a constitutional amendment to reduce the influence of money in political campaigns. Establish 18-year terms for Supreme Court justices, with one seat opening every 2 years for each session of Congress to determine. Change Election Day to Veterans Day, which is a national holiday, of course, and make voting a requirement of citizenship. Strengthen civic institutions. Tax social media and use the proceeds to fund independent journalism. Establish a universal expectation of national service for all citizens. These are just the highlights from their report. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would implement all of these. But that's the problem. Considering the state of our democracy today, how do these actions become law? These steps that strengthen democracy threaten the power enjoyed by people like Senator Lee, quoted earlier. So I think it's important for all of us to learn about these proposals and support them, but I'm afraid we should have started on that 20 years ago. What could we do to make a difference? What if we all go out and join marches to support the issues that are important to us? This certainly is not a bad thing to do. I've participated in a number of marches, particularly in the last 6 years. They are uplifting, but do they really lead to lasting change? Unfortunately, I think the answer is no. My belief and hope is that we can rebuild our institutions by directly engaging in broad-based community organizing. Today's readings that were from a short book entitled Rebuilding Our Institutions by Ernesto Cortez Jr. Until his recent retirement, he was the co-executive director of the Industrial Area Foundations. But he's still active advisor to IAF organizations in the Southwest United States. In his book, Cortez traces the roots of our dysfunctional democracy to the loss of local public institutions where people meet directly to deal with local issues. He provides examples of how community organizing can empower people and make positive changes in the community. So the IAF sponsors broad-based community organizing groups throughout the country. And NVUU, as I'm sure most of you know, is a member of one of these. It's called Common Ground, and it operates in Solano and Napa counties. All IAF organizations are comprised of dues-paying nonprofit institutions as members. Most of the members are religious organizations, but also include labor unions and charitable nonprofits. The dues are used to pay an IAF-trained lead organizer who helps to guide and mentor the participants in the organization. The core of the organizing method is based on relational meetings within the member institutions and between leaders of the institutions. Political power comes from organized money and organized people. In our democracy today, organized money is calling the shots in most cases. Community organizing builds organized people. Through relational house meetings, we learn about the local issues that families are facing. We then work together to decide what issues to address. We build connections with local political leaders, but we are nonpartisan. We want to maintain communication links with leaders regardless of their specific political beliefs. The goal is no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. And we look for issues to work on that are winnable and help us build power. So, yeah. And so let me share a couple of the achievements that Common Ground has had in the past couple of years. Just before the pandemic hit in January, this was in January of 2020, Common Ground held a large action with over 250 attendees in a church gym in Vallejo. We invited many politicians from the city of Vallejo, as well as Solano County Board of Supervisor candidates. And we also invited the chief of police of Vallejo. We presented stories from our members about their issues with housing, which were like huge rent increases that were being imposed when in Vallejo, where a couple of apartment buildings got bought out by an institution and they jacked up rents by $1,000 a month. And also, we heard stories about concern about public safety, in particular, how police respond to mental health related incidents. Shortly after that, January action, when the pandemic raised the specter of a wave of evictions that would be caused by the loss of wages, our housing team, which I was a co-leader of, realized that an emergency resolution was needed to provide tenants with from eviction, protect tenants from eviction. Because of our connections with a couple of key supervisors, and with the help with the power of connection from the Central Labor Council, we were able to have a Zoom meeting with a key supervisor, the county council, the county administrator, and then representatives from legal services of Northern California and several diverse Common Ground leaders. I was gobsmacked when the supervisor, considered to be conservative, asked the county council to work directly with legal services and Common Ground to develop the language of the eviction moratorium emergency resolution. So basically, Common Ground wrote that resolution based on the research we had done on what other counties had passed and what other IAF organizations in California were proposing. So the Solano County moratorium included language which prevented non-payment of rent due to COVID from being a cause of eviction. Back rent would still be due, but it could be paid over 24 months. If the landlord and tenant could not come to terms, the debt would be treated like consumer debt collected through small claims court instead of by eviction. The county council took the draft that that Common Ground and Legal Services had developed and added a provision to cover commercial rentals, but didn't change anything that we had done. And then I should say that the next supervisors meeting, that emergency resolution passed unanimously by the Solano County Board of Supervisors. The connections that were built before the pandemic served to open doors during that crisis. In the area of public safety, Common Ground also worked with Solano County and the city of Vallejo to establish mobile mental health crisis units. To the credit of both Vallejo and Solano County, they were already working on that, but I think the support of Common Ground helped move that along. So these units help to defuse mental health incidents so they don't become police shootings. Currently, the public safety team is working towards the passage of an ordinance in Vallejo to establish a civilian oversight board for the Vallejo Police Department. The team drafted a proposed ordinance with the assistance of a retired attorney living in Vallejo who had been the executive director of a similar oversight board in the city of Oakland. There are other victories I could highlight, but my point is this: a diverse coalition of people who know and trust each other can be a powerful force to capture the attention of elected officials and make positive changes in the community. The relational focus of this type of community organizing is vital. The first step is to organize an individual member institution. This is done by using house meetings, small group meetings, to allow people to share what issues they are facing in their lives and the lives of their friends and family. This is done to establish connections between people, collect stories, and also to find people who have the passion and commitment to be leaders. From these house meetings, core teams are established in each institution. Leaders from the core team can then serve on issue teams and plan actions. Months of research and connection building are typically needed to make progress on issues. The core team leaders also need to have a relationship with each other. They don't need to be personal friends, but they need to know what drives the other person. What do they care about? What's happening in their lives? Do they have the bandwidth to do the work? This is done through one-on-one meetings, typically a 30-minute meeting. In my work with Common Ground, I find that people often are reluctant or shy about setting up meetings. They don't want to take the other person's time, or, you know, everyone's busy. But everyone I have talked to has been willing to share. I've gotten so much out of connecting with people through these one-on-one meetings. One person sending an email to a county supervisor or city council member is unlikely to have an impact. But having a meeting, mostly we've been doing Zoom meetings the past couple of years, as you can imagine, with a diverse group of 4 or 5 Common Ground members has a much larger impact. Sharing personal stories also has much more impact than providing statistics. Completing the prep work through house meetings are vital for success. Is community organizing going to fix our democracy overnight? No, it's part of a process. I see people becoming engaged and empowered. And let me give you 2 quick examples. Greg is a Black man living in Vallejo. He's a leader of the SEIU, that's the Service Employees Union 1021, and that union is a Common Ground member. Greg grew up in Oakland, And I had a one-on-one meeting with him. And, after talking about sports or something like that, we got down to, some of our life experiences. And he told me about how he and his friends experienced racial targeting from San Leandro police. He said he never wants to go into San Leandro again. He also told me about his son was pulled over multiple times in Vallejo for driving while black. He is passionate about getting the Civilian Oversight Board established for the Vallejo Police Department. He can bring his organizing and negotiating skills to good use as part of the Common Ground team working on that. Another person I've met is Maria. Maria is a Spanish-only speaking member of Holy Spirit Catholic Church in Fairfield, which is also a Common Ground member. Her main issues have been education and rental assistance, and also she is the primary leader at Holy Spirit for Common Ground, holding weekly meetings and developing a strong core team at that institution. So we have interpretation available at most of our meetings, and some of our members are bilingual, but even though she speaks a little bit of English, but having that interpretation just makes her a full participant in our work. She's a breath of fresh air for Common Ground, speaking directly about the needs of the Holy Spirit community. When I work with Greg and Maria, as well as many others, I'm energized and inspired. That's why I volunteer with Common Ground, getting to know and working with a diverse group of people is great, and we get things done. There are always setbacks along the way, and things always take longer than hoped for, but the process is dynamic and self-reinforcing. Each success sets the groundwork to grow the organization, to increase its power, and to have more success. I want to invite you all to participate in future house meetings and to become members of our core team. Together, we can make a difference. And I just want to point out there is a core team meeting in person, the first in-person one we've had in a couple of years. That's going to be at Holy Spirit Church in Fairfield on this Thursday in the evening from 6:30 to 8. So even if you haven't been involved in Common Ground before, it's a good opportunity to learn what it's about and meet some of the people that are involved, and you can make your own judgment about whether it's something that works for you. So thank you.